Welcome back to lecture 1.2 in Unit 6. Today we're going to make connections between the story of Romeo and Juliet and the three primary musical themes in the tone poem by that same name. We're going to learn about program music and what a tone poem is, and you will identify the place musically represented in examples of nationalism and exoticism and discuss the benefits and potential dangers of each trend. Well, I guess we can't really discuss, but you know what I mean. Okay, program music is non-vocal music connected to a literary source. Instruments are used, but voices, lyrics, singers are not. And of course, the literary source can be a novel, it could be a play, a poem, it could be an autobiographical story. So there's a lot of different sources that the music can be connected to. And it's blending the two art forms, music and literature, to tell a story without the use of words. Now, sometimes you will have a written program that outlines the story, but the music itself is only using music and not words to tell that story. This type of music can capture a feeling, an essence, a mood, someone's personality, or just a more generic concept. And maybe autobiographical, as we'll see later. So German Lieder would not be considered program music because it has words, it has a singer. But the tone poem, also called the symphonic poem, would be considered program music. This genre was developed by the Hungarian pianist and composer Franz Liszt. It's a one-movement orchestral composition based on a poem, story, or other literary idea in free musical form. So unlike, let's say, a symphony, regular symphony, that has usually 4 movements, and many of those movements have to have sonata form, or maybe they use theme and variation form. This is just a single movement, rather than having the separated movements when you have to stop and start between them. And the form can be anything. The composer has all the freedom in the world to make the form of this piece fit the story that it's based on. Peter Tchaikovsky wrote a number of tone poems, I believe several of those. He wrote a lot of music for ballet, some of which you might be familiar with. So if you've ever heard any parts or seen Swan Lake, Sleeping Beauty, or The Nutcracker, all of that music was written by Tchaikovsky. He was born in 1840, died in 1893, and attended the St. Petersburg Conservatory for his musical education. He toured internationally as a conductor, sometimes conducting his own music and sometimes other people's music. And he, even though a lot of composers during this time worked very independently, he did have a wealthy patron, and the widow, her name is, I believe it's Augusta von Meck. Anyway, I believe the last name is correct. And she really admired Tchaikovsky and his music and the work he was doing, and wanted to support him, and so that he could write more music and continue creating all of this beautiful art. They did decide mutually not to meet in person ever. They did not want to meet in person, which to me seems a little bit strange, but that arrangement really worked for them, and they kept up a lively correspondence through letters. One of his beautiful compositions is Romeo and Juliet, and of course it's based on Shakespeare's play by the same name. So maybe you studied Romeo and Juliet in school, maybe not, but it is a love story, but it has a very tragic ending. Both of the main characters are dead at the end because of misunderstandings and just complications in the plot. So they're the two main characters, but we also have their family, a couple of their close friends. We have Friar Lawrence, who plays a very important role in the story. And in a nutshell, I'll just try to summarize this. Romeo and Juliet are young people living in Italy, and their families do not get along at all. Romeo is I always forget this. Romeo is the Montague, I think, and Juliet is the Capulet. And you can always fact check me here. You can look this up on like Spark Notes or something. And because their families don't get along, when they meet and fall in love, it's just not easy, right? It's hard for them to see each other. Their families would never agree to their marriage. They're also, I know Juliet is like a young teenager. I don't know if Romeo is also that young. But anyway, they would like to get married, but it's kind of hard to do that. There have been some people that were killed. There's just a lot of fighting. There's so much going on. So Friar Lawrence, though, decides he's tired of all the squabbling and he wants to help these two people be together. And in a lot of confusion, it involves poison and potions and all these things. And misunderstandings, and actually quarantine, believe it or not. Juliet is poisoned to make it appear that she is dead, although she is not. The message that she is not actually dead does not reach Romeo because another friar, another clergyman, is contained. He is in a quarantined house and he cannot leave to deliver his message. So Romeo finds Juliet, thinks she's dead. He kills himself. Juliet wakes up, sees that Romeo is dead. She kills herself. And then I'm not going to share the very, very, very end because I want you to hear this piece first. It is in what we're going to call a quasi-sonata form. There's a slow introduction. There is a main section that introduces the three themes of this piece. That's kind of like an exposition. There's a free development that jumps around to different themes, develops them, combines them in some new ways, alters them, and then there is a coda at the end. I have included a lot of timestamps so that you know exactly where to hear these things. I hope that helps. First of all, listen to the introduction. It's very ominous and foreboding. I think it's intended to let us know, first of all, things are not right in this little part of Italy. There's a lot of terrible things happening. Also, this story is not going to have a happy ending. It's letting us know that right from the start. So we hear very early on a theme played by the woodwinds, and we're going to call this the hymn theme. And it sounds like it could be an early Gregorian chant even, just with some additional harmonies. It's very simple. The note values are quite long and very regular. And it has this somber sound, which I think represents Friar Lawrence and the role that the church plays in this story, but particularly him. That's followed by these very tense sounding motives played by the strings, and then these very ethereal harp chords and arpeggios. And then the introduction goes on for a little bit longer. Some of these things repeat, but listen up until 5:44 first and get a feel for the introduction. Okay, next we're going to listen to the quasi exposition, I guess. So first we're going to hear the vendetta theme. This is the theme that is representing the conflict between the Montagues and the Capulets. It sounds militant, angry, agitated, and this is achieved through short motivic ideas, strong accents, full orchestral sound. It's very loud. It's very kind of flamboyant almost. It sounds like a sword fight because there's cymbals and there are all these clashing sounds. There's also places where imitation and polyphony are used, and this shows conflict. It shows how we have these two families fighting with each other. And this part is from 5:44 to 7:05. So that's going to be the vendetta theme. The third theme is the love theme, and this one is passionate and romantic. It comes, you'll hear it several times. The first kind of full expression of this theme starts at 9:01. And in this part, you'll hear it played by the woodwinds. Later on, you'll hear it played by the strings. And then there's also a sighing theme played by the strings that starts at 8:09, which is really beautiful as well. It's not the love theme, but it's kind of a similar idea. In the love theme, you're going to hear romantic melody at its finest. You'll hear long phrases, very winding up and down. A lot of chromaticism is used, and it sounds very sensuous. It sounds very emotive. So notice all of those things as you listen. All right, so I hope that you can tell the difference between the hymn theme, vendetta, and love themes, because in the development part, they're all going to come back. You're going to hear the vendetta and the hymn theme combined, and this might represent Friar Lawrence throwing his hat in the ring, taking sides, and becoming more active. He's not going to be a passive observer anymore. He is going to take action to help Romeo and Juliet. So his theme becomes very militant sounding at 13:14. You'll hear cymbals. It's much faster. It's played by the trumpets. So that's a really fascinating transformation of this peaceful, somber, religious sounding theme from the introduction. We have the recapitulation starting at 13:14 going to 17:04. It brings both the vendetta and the love themes back, and they kind of start to fight against each other. The love theme is interrupted by the vendetta theme at 15:47. We're left kind of wondering, okay, well, which one is going to win out? Is love going to conquer all? Or will the fighting and the confusion keep these two people apart? How is it going to end? And then finally, in the coda, the love theme is partially reiterated, and then a new theme is introduced at 17:42. So when we hear the love theme at 17:04, how is it transformed? How is it different from the original version? And then we'll hear a slow version of the love theme with harp chords and a drum roll. And then the very end, does it sound completely tragic? Or is there another emotion you start to feel? So make sure you do listen to all of these things. I would listen all the way through and then maybe jump back and listen to specific themes so that you can answer these two last questions. And then we'll go on. Okay, so the love theme at 1704, you probably noticed, is very slow. It sounds full of anguish and heartache. It's in a minor key. And this is because the ending, of course, when Romeo and Juliet both die, is so heartbreaking and so tragic. So you hear that in the reiterated love theme. But the very end, I think, sounds quite hopeful. Why would Tchaikovsky want to leave us with hope? Well, the end of Shakespeare's story is that the families, realizing that their fighting and squabbling has resulted in the deaths of their children, they decide to make peace, to reconcile, to work things out, and to end all of the fighting. So that is why we're left with that bit of hope, that light rather than the heaviness and the darkness. So this is what program music is like. It's telling a story using music, and there is a story sometimes written down, sometimes not. And there's actually been a very long, heated debate over, is program music even a good thing? Why does music need literature? Why does it need an extra musical association? Why can't we just have music and enjoy it for music? And you might be on one side or the other of this, or you might not really have a strong opinion. But something that's interesting to just consider is, as a listener, is it distracting to you to have a program or a story that you have to follow as you go through the music? Would you rather have that, or would you rather just be completely immersed in what you're hearing and the sounds of these instruments or voices? And I think perhaps even that would depend on if the story is a familiar one to you. If you have to really struggle to just find all the elements and understand how the music relates to the story, that could be a definite challenge. But either way, I hope that you enjoyed Romeo and Juliet and just how colorful and how creative Tchaikovsky was in highlighting the most important parts of Shakespeare's play and putting that into music so beautifully. That was in your playlist. I don't recall which one. Let me see. That's playlist number 4. Yes. All right. Now we move on to nationalism. We have nationalism and exoticism, two different trends in music of this time. Nationalism is based on this struggle for national identity, which we touched on briefly last lecture. A lot of countries wanted to create art and music and literature that celebrated their distinct cultural heritage and that celebrated the beautiful parts of their country. So one way of doing this is to embed well-known folk tunes into concert pieces. Another way is to write music that is celebrating national heroes or landmarks and particular people or places. One composer who did just this is Bedřich Smetana. He was born in Bohemia in 1824 and was a little piano prodigy, giving concerts as young as age 6. At this time, Bohemia was really controlled by Austria, and because of this, Smetana fled to Sweden and lived there for a time, and later on returned to Bohemia, which was later renamed the Czech Republic, in 1861, when they had achieved more freedom and were independent. He founded the Czech National School and just began writing music for his country. He wrote operas in his native language. He wrote 6 symphonic poems about Bohemia, and we're going to listen to the one called the Moldau, or Vltava. The Moldau is the longest river in the Czech Republic, and so it winds through the countryside and through cities and past all of these important geographical features and places. The melody that you hear right at the beginning, da 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 da. Wait, I'm gonna get this wrong. Let me I'll listen to it first before I try to hum it to you, or I'll just point it out in the YouTube video. But this famous melody is adapted from another melody called La Montovana, and it's also used in a Bohemian folk song and in other situations. About this piece, Smetana wrote, "The composition describes the course of the Vltava, starting from the 2 small springs, the cold and the warm Vltava, to the unification of both streams into a single current. The course of the Vltava through woods and meadows, through landscapes where a farmer's wedding is celebrated, the round dance of the mermaids in the night's moonshine. On the nearby rocks loom proud castles, palaces, and ruins aloft. The Vltava swirls into the St. John's Rapids, then it widens and flows toward Prague, past the Vyšehrad," I probably did not say that right, "and then majestically vanishes into the distance, ending at the Labe." So, this is the journey that we are going to go on right now. So find playlist 5 and go ahead and listen. Try to hear all of these moments in the piece. There's actually a timeline for the Moldau in your textbook on page 199. So that would be, I think, a very helpful thing to know where you are in the course of the river. Do you hear each of these little scenes being depicted musically? How does Smetana depict the movement of the river? And what types of contrasts do you hear? Okay, so I know that's a little bit long as well, but it's really fascinating to me how each scene is depicted. Like the wedding scene out in the countryside is very light, it's very joyful sounding, and the rhythm of the little tune is modeled after a type of dance called the polka. And then with the very end, when the river flows past the castle, the music is full volume, grand, full orchestra, and it sounds so majestic. And that's just a couple examples. The water you can hear the flowing, well, I guess first streams that turn into these powerful rivers, or a powerful river. You hear all of the winding notes. It sounds like a bubbling brook, and all of the movements that you hear originally in the flutes communicates that movement of the water. So I hope that you enjoyed that very much. There's so many examples that we could listen to that illustrate nationalism in music, but this is a really beautiful one that celebrates Bohemia. Okay, exoticism is a fascination with distant places rather than a way to celebrate your own country. It is celebrating or being interested in another place that you are not from, and it does this by mimicking the sounds of other musical traditions and cultures. Now, there are definitely some pretty serious dangers to exoticism, I think, as we'll see in just a second. If you are not from a place, you haven't lived there, you haven't studied their music in any type of detail, you're going to have a very imperfect understanding at best of what their music is like and what their culture is like. So I think that a lot of composers definitely have stumbled into what you might call cultural appropriation and misrepresentation of other cultures through exoticism. So we're going to watch a few of the dances from the Nutcracker Ballet by Peter Tchaikovsky. So Tchaikovsky is Russian, keep that in mind. And the dances in this part of the ballet are all kind of representing a different country, a different place. So I believe that the playlist for this does start you right at the correct spot. And then I'll give you some timestamps for each one. So just listen to the first dance that comes up and see if you can determine which country Tchaikovsky is trying his best to represent here. And then we'll go through a few others after that. Okay, so country on that first dance would be Spain. And one of the most obvious clues to this is the use of castanets, which you hear near the end. It's the kind of clicking sound. And that is an instrument that you will hear in Spanish music. So costumes and the choreography itself also will contribute to exoticism in ballet. But I guess melodic style, instrumentation, those types of things also were coming into Tchaikovsky's, consciousness as he was writing this. Okay, the next dance begins at 58:43. Okay, so you might have guessed Egypt. You might have guessed somewhere in the Middle East. This is called the Arabian dance. So again, costuming is important here. Choreography. The mode, the key, this is in a harmonic minor key, which often will sound. It'll make us think of places. Perhaps like Arabia or like Egypt. It might bring up images of snake charmers or belly dancers or things like that. And I mean, perhaps that is just how Western minds are trained to think of music from these places through, pop culture and stuff like that. We'll watch one more of these dances. This last one is short. It begins at the 1 hour, 1 minute, and 24-second mark. Okay, so that was the Chinese dance. You can probably see how exoticism, I believe, reinforces stereotypes and not helpful at all in that respect. And I think it can just show ignorance, as because if we're not really studying and understanding music from these different countries, we are of course going to misrepresent and stereotype. There's just no other way around it. But this was a trend that was really popular in the 1800s and into the 1900s among a lot of composers. So try, I think, just make sure that as you listen, and I am including extra listening in the playlist, you don't confuse nationalism and exoticism. They're very, very different. So work on maybe doing some extra listening, hearing these things, and if you listen to other types of program music, work on being able to follow the story, the literary source, as you listen to the music. And then we'll have one more lecture in this unit that will cover the program symphony.